Okay. Hey there.
Hey.
Hey. So, just starting out, the first in what might be a series of videos, discussions between me and Deran. So, just firstly, my name's Percy Ray Ballard. You can call me Ray. You can call me Dr. Ballard. You can also call me Percy if you want, but I usually go by Ray. And I'm an IFS trained psychiatrist and psychotherapist. Also a sex coach that went through training with Somatica. Um, and lot of other things in terms of relationships, which we'll probably get to. But and I'm here with Duran. And Duran, if you want to introduce yourself or say a few things about you.
Yeah, so my name is Deran Young. I'm the founder of Black Therapist Rock and a licensed therapist, also a retired military officer. I am too trained in IFS, and Dr. Ballard and I met in person for the very first time. I was thinking about this morning,
Hmm.
back in 2017.
Mm,
It was a long time ago. I feel like I was a whole different person then. But I was very much
same.
learning how to embrace all parts of myself. I was still in the military on active duty at the time. In August 2017, when Black Therapist Rock had our first conference, our annual conference in Silver Spring, Maryland. And I remember back in those days wondering, like, who will I be after the military? Who do I want to be? Because I had never decided much for myself. I never got to decide where I wanted to live, you know, where I lived, what I wore, what I did. For the most part, everything was decided for me. So that kind of sets the stage of what my relational life was like. I was also recently divorced back then. I've been divorced since 2014, so wasn't dating at the time, really wasn't sure how to date, wasn't I really didn't have a good understanding of men or sex or what this whole love life stuff was supposed to be about. I really was, kind of lost when it came to my love life. And so I met Dr. Ballard, and to me, he was somebody who portrayed this confident, outgoing guy. One of the ways I think I'm realizing one of the triggers for me is when a man tells me that they dance.
A trigger.
I'm noticing my patterns. I'm a big I go crazy for men who dance. So I think he mentioned at the conference that he might go dancing later, and I was like, "What dancing?"
Oh yeah.
And so I saw this outspoken, outgoing person who was, really aware of themselves and putting themselves out there in the world with a lot of confidence. And so I kind of latched on to him as somebody
Mm,
who could teach me and model things for me and practice some things with me and maybe even, walk me through some things. And
mm,
long story short, since 2017, I feel like he's taught me so much. And I've been able to have conversations with Dr. Ballard that I probably haven't had with any other man in my life, until I was started having those conversations with him. So much so that I remember one of our first conversations where I was really vulnerable. I want to say it was maybe 4 or 5 years ago. I was sitting outside of a grocery store and I was talking and talking and talking like I am now. And I was saying, oh, my vagina, or like I would say words that I wasn't fully comfortable saying. And I realized it was very uncomfortable for me to refer to my vagina or my body in general, to talk about my breasts, to talk about my shape, to talk about anything pertaining to having a body. There was a big source of shame there. And particularly, I realized that I could not say the word pussy. And I was telling one of my friends, she's a sex therapist, Yolanda. Shout out to Yolanda Rogers. I was
mm.
telling her, I really struggled to say the word pussy, and now I can do it. She's like, we were laughing together because she's like, yeah, I remember that. So I've come a long way in my journey of expressing my sexuality, embracing my sexuality, and really just embodying my own sexuality and what that means to me. And I think that this channel is going to be a great time for us to unpack some of the things I've already learned and some of the things that I'm still learning as I share it with the community who's probably also wanting to learn some of these same lessons.
Yes. Wow. Wow. Yeah, when I hear you and think about your journey, I'm like, wow, the student has become the master. Like, because yeah, you have opened up, and just have like your heart has opened, you have such vulnerability, and your heart has opened and invited your body into it as part of that, as part of that expression of who you are. So I think that's really beautiful. And we've had conversations and learned a lot from one another. And one thing that stimulated this discussion, it was just like, okay, wait, we've got to record some of these discussions. You said something last week when we talked. He said, Ray, as a I'm dating as a spiritual practice.
Right.
And I was like, okay, stop. We've got to hit record on that statement. Can you tell me what you mean by you are dating as a spiritual practice?
Yeah, I think oftentimes the conversations around sex and sexuality and love in general really activates like our more primitive parts of ourselves, especially. And when you've experienced trauma, it activates all that trauma that's covering up, your natural being, your natural sense of who you are. So for me, someone who experienced a lot of trauma, including sexual trauma, it was very hard for me to embrace sex as something that could be my own and that could be personal. That it was always something that you did for somebody or that you gave to somebody, but it wasn't specifically for me. And as I have conversations with other women of color, especially Black women, I hear a lot of Black women kind of saying that sex isn't something they're either interested in, or they don't enjoy it, or they don't see the purpose of it. And I've learned that sex can be very, very therapeutic, not just for women, but especially for men. I also said something to you last week that I've learned about men. I've learned a lot about men because what I've come to understand is I didn't really have good masculine energy in my life. Even though I was in the military for most of my adult life, 20 years almost, I was surrounded by men, but I didn't have a relationship, a intimate relationship with most of the men in my life, including my own father. And I think that's true for a lot of women of color as well. So when we don't have a relationship with, people who identify as male or men, we don't have a relationship with our own body. How do you connect those two? If your preference is men and you want to have romantic relationships with men and you want to experience that with your body's involved in that. How can you do that if there's so much uncertainty and unknown around that? So for me, one of the main things that I've learned in this spiritual practice is that men typically communicate through their bodies. And I said that to you last week. I'm raising a young man, and he has a lot of questions about his body that we have to talk about from the parenting perspective, as he's learning about his body. And I don't ever want him to be ashamed of his body and what it's doing or what he's learning about it. So I've opened up to that and I've welcomed that, questions all the way from wet dreams to what do girls like and how do you get a girl to like you.
Oh, we got to have your son on this show. This
Really
is kind
great
of,
questions. Okay.
yeah,
What does it mean to come?
yeah. We can have a
These are
good this.
questions that, I wish I was able to ask my parents and the people who were guiding and nurturing me into my own development. And so I'm re-healing, reparenting and healing these parts of my own inner wounded child, my own little girl inside of me. And as I'm doing that work, I feel like I can share her with more men who really like to play with her. Like there's a lot of inner little boys who like to play. Play and pleasure. I think they're kind of like cousins. you know and I tend to be a very playful person, so I really love how my love life has evolved. And like I said, the spiritual practice of dating, it really brings up some of the most vulnerable parts of myself and gets me to express that in ways that I never thought was possible.
Mm, yeah, beautiful. So dating is a spiritual practice for you. It's like you are healing your trauma. You're finding it's bringing up parts in you that you're healing for a greater. I see that as like trauma healing. You mentioned spiritual. Like, what makes it spiritual for you?
I think that trauma, like, it not destroys our spirit, but it kind of it makes us lose our way. It disconnects us from our spirit, if you will. It gives us this idea that our mind, body, and our spirit are not one. That I have to be up in my head. Like my biggest coping mechanism was being up in my head. So it was almost as, like I said,
Mm,
as if I didn't have a body. I was completely in avoidance and ignoring, anything below the neck.
mm,
So now that I can, move out of here and more into here, and feel the things that are happening from the neck down, it's a more it's just a more intimate, more rich, and a deeper experience for me. Everything is. It's not, what happens in the
mm.
bed carries out throughout your life, in my opinion.
Whoa, yes, yes. Wow.
Or
Yeah.
whatever's not happening in the bed, like that was another part of my story, that there were many years where nothing was happening in the bed. I had books on the other side of the bed to kind of replace where a man would be, literally. And someone pointed that out to me. You replace men with books, like, you're a really smart person, and I can get high on my own supply when it comes to knowledge.
Mhm. Well, there are worse things that you can replace a man with besides books. So hey, you did well there, and you moved through it. But yeah, when you're mentioning, like, I share that in common with you about spirituality being about oneness and bringing everything together, unity. When I think about spirituality, I think, spirituality is about love, which really means that's the experience of oneness, the experience of separation, non-duality, us being one with God and God being one with everything. Like those sorts of um, statements kind of resonate with spirituality for me. So I like the idea of bringing everything together, healing the exiles, bringing them into as a part of the system, and the system being united through self, as we would say in IFS. So yeah, I think dating is a huge way of pointing out what's not integrated for us for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
One thing I will say also, I think it's important to point out, because anytime I bring up spirituality, some people are thinking religion.
Mm.
Uh,
Mhm.
so for me, I definitely do distinguish the two. For me, religion is what I had as a kid that made me very fearful of sex. It made me very afraid of men. It made me very afraid of power, including my own power.
Mm.
So I want to be clear that we're not talking about religion. We might refer to religion sometimes, but for me, when I say spirituality, it is something separate. It is more about what you believe, what you have faith in, what you put faith in. I put faith and hope in love. So I'm so glad that you use that word. That's one thing that I really believe in. I think it's going to be here, no matter what. There's always love inside of us. There's always love around us. And again, it's the trauma that makes us think otherwise. It's trauma that makes us feel that love is not available to us and that it doesn't flow from us. And now I know that's so far from the truth, that everywhere I go, I bring love with me, and I can experience that, I can share that. And just because someone may be looking for something more short term or more informal, doesn't mean that love is not involved. That's another thing that I'm realizing, that some people can do the casual sex thing. We've talked about this in a different conversation, but that's not something I can do, because I'm such a person who's flowing with love, and I'm just wanting to just wrap somebody up in all this juiciness of love.
Mhm.
And I just think that even in casual sex, there is some form of love for self, or some energetic expression of love is happening still.
Yeah, yeah. I'm taking that and reflecting on what you're saying. Like love for me is the experience, the felt experience of oneness, and trauma is the experience, the ultimate experience of separation. The more
Mhm.
traumatic, the more separate you feel.
Right.
Um, so wow.
And I also want to
Mhm.
say that it is very common and very often that people are having sex from a place of trauma. Right.
Mhm.
That I have done that. I'm sure maybe we all have done that. But
Mhm.
trauma bonding is what that referred that the terminology for that. When we're trauma bonding, to me, it makes me doubt myself more. It makes me feel less secure in the world. It makes me feel nervous, uncertain, anxious. It draws me back to my old attachment style, if you will.
Yeah.
versus a true experience of love, whether it's through friends, community, family. It really brings me more into a secure form of who I am, an
Mm,
authentic expression of the fullness of me.
right. So with trauma bonding, you don't feel that wholeness, that connection, that oneness. You're feeling something different. Although there's another person involved,
Right.
you're not feeling very one with them. You're actually feeling separate or pining after them or hating them. Like there are sorts of separation that are going on. You're like, you're very much two different beings. You're not experiencing the oneness in that as well, is what I'm hearing. Wow. And so you mentioned some people being able to have, casual, some people looking for casual relationships, some people looking for, their next, their lifetime partner, everything in between. But, as we talk about this in IFS terms, like different systems need different things on their spiritual journey of healing with this. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Wow.
The other thing that comes to mind for me is as we talk about trauma and love, is hormones. Like oxytocin, and just our chemical makeup, the chemicals in our body that feel so good, to our bodies, right?
Mhm.
Oftentimes, when we're bonding with people or relating and connecting, there's a good feeling. Typically, sometimes it's for me. Sometimes I can notice now when it's dopamine, when I'm just kind of getting high off of excitement, because
Word.
my body does that really, really well. It's always done that for me. It's one of those parts that are very strong in my system. My
Ooh.
body loves excitement. It's like,
Mhm.
oh, we're getting excited. Ooh, we. um, but I also now have to think about, estrogen. How does estrogen play a part in my system? How does, like I said before, oxytocin, how does those things play and testosterone because we all have estrogen and testosterone, right?
Yes,
And
sir.
certain behaviors or certain experiences can raise those chemical levels. So one of the teachers that I've been following as it relates to hormones is Dr. John Gray, and he wrote the book Men Are from Mars, Women
Mars,
Are
yeah.
from Venus. Yeah, and he says that when men are, soaring their oats, if you will, that it actually reduces oxytocin with anyone that they're sleeping with. So the ability to bond is reduced or limited when you're sharing, that experience with so many people.
Mm,
And so it's all about what kind of experience are you wanting to have. Like you said, for some people, they need to have the oxytocin maybe lowered because they want to experience something different or they want to have another feeling in their body. But even, like with psychedelics and all of these biological factors, I think that is a good way to navigate our journey, to integrate all of who we are and to have that spiritual um, process that we want to have to heal our bodies and our mind and our spirit.
yes. Wow. Cool. Well, that brings me to a question because there's something that you mentioned that you may want to discuss on camera, but you were saying like, oh, there's stuff that's happening lately that you had some questions about or some lack of clarity, and it's just like, hey, well, that's what we're here for.
Yes. So I've recently been learning a lot, and maybe if you know about this, you can put whatever comments in the comment section. I'm totally open to continue to learn and learn from our audience and our participants that are watching. But I've been learning a lot recently about the polyamorous lifestyle and kind of wondering, I wondered for a little while, am I truly a monogamous person? Because I have so much love to give and I love so freely, is it possible that I could be polyamorous? So that's a separate question that I had been asking myself over the years, alongside the casual sex kind of question in my own personal dating journey. And for me, I have found that I heal very deeply and very passionately and just in a very beautiful way when I'm able to go really, really deep with one person.
Mm,
I would say that probably has a lot to do with like my attachment style and my trust issues and, just the experiences that I've had in this body on this earth. But it takes a lot. It takes me feeling really seen and really safe and really held before I can just share all of myself with somebody or most of myself or even like the more vulnerable parts of myself. And so, with that being said, as a more monogamous person, and I believe all of these things are probably on a spectrum somewhere. as someone who really heals in monogamy. And another book that I would recommend is a book called Spiritual Partnership. It's one of Oprah's favorite books, and I was introduced to it by her actually. And that's kind of what her and Stedman have, that they have this journey together that they're working on to heal some of the deeper, more embedded wounds that they carry around attachment and safety and partnership, and that they're learning how to rely on each other, trust each other, hold each other, and they're committed to that journey together. Right. So that's spiritual partnership, that we're in this to evolve and grow for our greater purpose. And when you have a big old purpose like me, I got a big old giant purpose, I feel like. Um, I need someone who can, hold that with me. That it can be a lot to hold on your own. I'm sure for Oprah too, it could be a lot to just navigate those experiences day in and day out, and not have one person that you really feel like they get you, they're there for you, and they understand you, because they're committed to understanding you for your own, for both of your own growth. So spiritual partnership is something that I've been committed to. I would say I learned about spiritual partnership in the midst of learning about IFS. I would say probably 4 or 5 years ago as well. And it really emphasizes the U-turn. When something's happening, when someone's choosing to live their life because that's what they're allowed to do, and I can't control it, because I used to, have a lot of issues around control, which many women we do. When men don't do what we want to do, we find a way to try to make them do what we want to do, right? Which isn't a wonderful experience for them either, right? That's not very loving for either of us. So I've learned to let those power dynamics fall by the wayside. I'm learning, still learning, I would say. But really, the spiritual partnership is about taking the U-turn and really asking myself, why is this so important to me? When someone is making a choice and I'm having a hard time accepting their choice,
Mm.
why is that inside of my own body and my own system? What is it that my system, my body needs that I can provide for myself? Or that part of me, as Dr. Ballard and I always talk about, the self-to-part relationship, the relationship that my adult self has with my inner wounded child from my trauma experiences. When I come back to those wounds that are yearning for my attention first and always, right? Before I can share this with somebody, I have to have some awareness and some understanding of what's happening inside me to articulate that. So I've been able to, and men always tell me like, this is dating me is a really unique experience, because I'm showing my heart and I'm sharing myself in such a deep and passionate way that typically most people don't bother. They don't trust that to be a safe experience for them. They haven't had, enough experience with that to trust it. And so I was telling one of the guys that I'm dating that, maybe we're better off friends, because I noticed that he's, having sex with multiple people, and he's really enjoying that experience for himself.
Mm.
I think right now he feels like that's what feels like love to him, loving himself after being in a very committed relationship for a very long time, over a decade. He's like, I just want to enjoy the art of sex and sharing that part of me with as many people as possible.
Mhm.
So, my way of loving myself is to say that doesn't work for me, that actually makes me really concerned about my health. I want to give my vulnerability to somebody who's going to be a good steward of it and who's going to hold and cherish it. And I don't know that he can do that if he's spreading himself, and I really, what I really respected and appreciated, because I was worried about how to express that to him, because I'm still interested in him. I'm just not interested in that experience with him. And so I shared that with him yesterday, actually. And he was very receptive to it. And I think he kind of already knew, because he said, I really like you. And I think you're really wonderful and special. And I kind of sense that may have been the reason why we haven't, taken things a step further as far as being more romantic or being more affectionate with each other. Because he kind of had the sense that he said, you're a serious person, and I can respect that you want something serious. And I'm like, yeah, I don't want to be played with. Like,
Mm.
and I think a lot of women feel this way, but because of patriarchy, we've been told to feel whatever the man's feeling, to just go with the flow and whatever he wants and whatever he needs, and prioritize that over what we want and what we need. And I'm learning, no, I don't have to do that anymore. I don't have to roll over and play dead. I'm an adult. I can communicate. I can make my needs known, and we can talk about it and navigate it together, negotiate it, because that too is spiritual partnership.
Yes. Wow. Wow. So what I really admire the sense of like a knowledge of your own system. Like the U-turn is like, if looking for anyone who's listening, like the U-turn is golden. Like that's just like the best thing ever. Um um
Can
yeah.
you can you explain what a U-turn is? Because I don't know if I ever do it well enough.
Sure, yeah. A U-turn is basically when in relationship or partnership, friendship, whatever the relationship happens to be, um, when we feel some kind of way, our tendency is to come out and say, you did this and I didn't feel good about this. And notice how whatever statement it might be like, could I give you some feedback? It might be whatever kind of way, but the finger is pointed outwards towards the other person. So the U-turn is actually taking the finger and turning it back this way and saying, I noticed that I'm feeling kind of, I'm feeling some kind of way. I'm feeling angry right now. Or I noticed that I'm feeling really sad. I noticed that I'm surprised. I noticed I'm feeling numb. And, this is what's happening inside of me right now. And it basically doesn't make it about the other person. And notice when your finger is pointed at yourself, you can't criticize somebody else. You can say, I feel sad, or I feel hurt, and let me tell you about my experience right now. And it doesn't make any claim about what the other person's intention is, or what they were trying to do, how they might feel or what they did wrong. It's like, this is just what's happening with me. So I call that, when you turn the finger here and say, I'm just going to speak about my experience right now, and the other person, and then you can ask, I feel hurt, or I feel afraid, when I know that you're sleeping with other people. I feel afraid, and I feel like it's not going to work for me. It doesn't work for my attachment system.
Right.
And it doesn't make and I noticed that about how you did that. Like, you didn't make it bad that this person was doing that. So you shouldn't be sleeping with other people, because that doesn't how's he going to respond to that? But saying that this doesn't work for me, and notice that he can't argue with the fact that it doesn't work with you. If you say you shouldn't be doing that, he can argue with that. Well, that's a matter of opinion. But how I feel about myself, like when you notice that you're really owning your own experience and saying, this is what's happening for me, there's no room for argument.
Mm.
And it makes it a really clear and crisp discussion. There's not a disagreement. Because if I say that I feel sad, you can't say, no, you're not feeling sad. That's crazy. So yeah, I like that way of communication and owning. And you took it a step deeper and saying, and this is, or you can take it a step deeper and say, this is why. It's because I fear, I'm not sure what it is for you, but like, I fear being abandoned. And I love that example that you brought up, just because, personally, I'm actually inspired by your vulnerability and openness. I've always been. But I'll say that in that situation, like I've lived both polyamorous and monogamous lifestyles, and yeah, have been on both ends of that. So it's just like, oh, they're totally, understandable. And different people's systems need different things at different periods of time. And so, one's knowing of their system, just like yours, can make
Mhm.
you so much more effective at dating, and it can empower. And it's not about making any sort of, not about changing yourself or making any sort of, trauma or whatever going away, but with whatever system that you have, what works the best for you. um, the somatica system, like called it, I mean, it's not, an exclusive somatica term, but trauma empowerment. It's not necessary always, you don't have to always, it's great to heal the trauma, but you can be empowered from whatever kind of history that you have, other people, and there's trauma on the other end of the spectrum too. I've dated, polyamorously because it's like, oh, I'm afraid of being too close to people. It's not always that. It's not
Yeah.
always that. And I've dated monogamously, and I've wanted to get people into monogamous relationship because I'm afraid they'll abandon me, and I can't have that happen. That's trauma based too.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just like there are so many ways of being that are okay and that are beautiful. And knowing what works for you and how to express that lovingly is a really beautiful skill that you apparently have, Deran.
Yeah. Well, I've developed it. It's a very new skill that I'm, always developing. But I think the one thing for me too is I used to have the fear of abandonment and a fear of intimacy. And so one of the other concepts that I think goes really well with this conversation is polarization. When you're not doing the U-turn and you jump in the fight and you kind of go back and forth with someone, um, you're not convincing them. You know what I mean? Like we sometimes can think that we're convincing them and we're pulling them to our side, but what you're doing is you're pulling each other, and that's not very loving. And you don't get to be on your own sides. You don't get to say, this is where I firmly stand and what I believe in. And what I realized is when I would be polarized, about something, I wasn't rooted in my own experience. I wasn't able to do the U-turn and come back to what do I want? What do I value? What do I need? And so I was abandoning myself like all the time. There was a fear of the other person abandoning me. So then I would abandon myself. But now it's like, I'm going to be on my own side. I'm going to be my own best friend, whether you're here or not. You know what I mean? Like, I'd rather abandon you. To be honest. It's not about, whether or not you are accepting and, want me or the desirability of you wanting me. It's really about owning my own experience and what I want. So I would say some of us, we have a fear of intimacy around just being seen, and I have that still. The
Mm,
fear of abandonment, not so much, but the fear of intimacy. If I really let you get close and see all of me, then what? What are you going to do with that? What happens, after that?
mhm,
So that uncertainty that all human beings, we crave certainty. In
mhm,
uncertainty, I think that's another thing that makes this a spiritual practice or a spiritual journey. Because uncertainty is a real part of life. There are things that we cannot control, that we can't, manipulate. There are energies and people out there that we have nothing to do with, we have no say over. So coming back to myself and being intimate with myself, knowing myself, intimacy, I always say it stands for into me see. Can I see inside of my own self?
mm,
Right. Before I'm thinking that I want someone else to do that, is that even something that I can offer myself?
yes, yeah. When you say see, into me see, right? So you are aware of your own parts, and those parts are part of a system. And when you are in relationship with someone else, it's like you can almost look at it like, okay, this is a part, another system of parts visiting my system and becomes a part of my system. And
Yeah.
when you kind of into the collective space, when you introduce, and that's part of the vulnerability, I was just having this conversation earlier today that you introduce new parts of yourself into that system that that person has not seen yet.
Right.
It's like, oh, their system is going to change and reform around that. Like, and you can't control how that, how that happens. Um,
Because there's like this third entity, if you will. I know you and I, we always talk about self to self connection and self to self relationship, which is kind of the only thing I want to do these days.
100%. Yeah.
But there's also like this joint self, this collective self that we have in the middle that's growing and evolving and changing. And it's like a painting, if you will. It's like I put a color, a mark or something, a stroke on the canvas, and the other person puts a stroke on the canvas. So what we're creating together is this whole interesting thing that neither one of us can control on our own.
Yeah. Creating a new system. I think it's almost poetic that like, okay, you're creating, you're introducing new things, and eventually, this is like one of my like I'm gonna go off and do some like deep thought. You're gonna be like, what the hell? But yeah, eventually you're introducing new things to the system, and each of you might contribute. This is gonna sound but each of you contribute. Eventually might contribute a gamete, and then you have a child. Like so, it's like yeah, you're literally introducing, like you start introducing physical parts as well, and that becomes its own physical system as well, which you've had the experience of doing that. So but
And I honestly think that that adds another level to sex.
mm,
You know, this is gonna sound funny, but I used to not talk during sex at all. I used to think it was weird to talk during sex, and now I think it's weird not to. To not be telling someone what you're feeling inside your body, to not express it, to not be asking for what you want, how you want it.
go ahead,
It's
Deran.
so much more exciting, so much more like the painting is just all over the canvas. It just makes everything so much more full and alive and rich and healing and therapeutic, in my opinion.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. When we have parts that are trying to control the painting, it
Mm.
limits what the painting can be, and it's a boring painting. But when it's just like, okay, let's just let go and let's put this part on the canvas. And what's beautiful about that is that you get to have whatever relationship is going to happen. You can't control it, but you get to be you, which is such a beautiful and priceless freedom to have.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
remember a mentor telling me about authenticity. He's like, first of all, the only way that you're going to find someone who's right for you um is to be yourself. Because if you put on a mask, they're going to fall in love with the mask, and they're going to realize that that's not you. um and when it comes to just being oneself, like living with one's heart open and having parts there, like he's like, yes, like your parts that are afraid of doing that, they're right. If you do that, you will get hurt. And that's what courage is a way of life. It is living, or it is being or doing a certain thing, knowing that sometimes it's going to hurt. The upside of that is you get to be you. And this guy, he said, the thing about it, like I live with my heart open. I trust people by default, and I get hurt. But you only get to hurt me once.
Mm. Mhm.
Right? If you hurt me and then we can't iron it out, it's okay. I have freedom and sovereignty over this. So, like that person can be out of my life, and that's okay. But at least I get to be me. And it does, like, the hurt. After a while, the joy of just being able to be me and not having the stress of trying to be someone different than me, like that's worth the pain that I have. And I think everyone has to make that decision for themselves and take it at their own pace. But I thought that was a beautiful piece of advice that he gave me.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, where are we right now? Anything that you feel like needs to
Mm.
be discussed? Does this feel complete?
It feels pretty complete, actually. I'm surprised.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's the other thing that I'm learning, about intimacy. Like I said, I had a huge, I'm realizing I now realize I had a huge fear of intimacy, and I wouldn't even let people in platonically,
Mm,
and I now am a big proponent of people having, all kinds of relationships in their lives so that you're not depending on one person for everything. But being able to talk about relationships with people that you're not in a romantic relationship with, men, women, non-binary, trans, etc. People of different experiences, being able to weigh in, and people who care about you, who've earned the right to hear your vulnerability and to hear your story. I think when they can weigh in and say, well, here's another perspective. Because as one of the radio personalities here says, when you keep an open mind, new stuff gets in.
mhm.
So
That's
I'm very
great.
sexually open minded. I'm relationally open minded. I'm psychologically open minded, emotionally open minded. But I like for new things to get in. I like to grow and to evolve into the next version of whoever I'm meant to be. And just having these conversations with you, Dr. Ballard, is always like, oh, yeah, that's a whole new perspective and a whole new realm that I get to dance and play in now.
Yes, I
Yeah,
enjoy these conversations too, and I'm getting a lot from them. And yeah, let's definitely continue and find a time to do this again.
absolutely. So I think next time, maybe one thing we might talk about for those who are wondering, where are these conversations going to go? I know that I posted on Facebook about the fact that I got two different guys to give me their numbers recently on my way back from Jamaica. I was in the airport in Jamaica with the guy sitting at the bar for about 3 hours, and he was just
Mhm.
mesmerized by the time I was done. And then on my layover, I bumped into another guy. I like literally bumped into him, which happens to me a lot. I bumped into nice, handsome, strapping men. Seems like everywhere
Yeah,
I'm just
we're
so
we're gonna
moment.
get to we're gonna get to your secret around that next time that we talk, I'm sure. So yeah, I'm looking forward to that.
Yes, yes. So more to come for
More to
sure.
so to speak. All right. I totally enjoyed this, Duran, and really looking forward to next time.
Absolutely.
All right.